Holy mackerel. All right, I feel like I'm on the Warriors. So I want to give you my perspective in 15 minutes where we think at Abra this is all going. So since I only have 15 minutes, you can play it back in 1/2 speed later on. So my favorite opening slide for presentations I do all around the world is to address the naysayers up front. Bitcoin has only 2 proven use cases after 8 years, criminal activity and speculation, and the same kind of indirectional quote on the scaling side. On the internet itself, I predict the internet will soon go spectacularly supernova, and in 1996 catastrophically collapse. And this had to do with internet addresses and IPv4, for those of you in the know, and this was from the inventor of the Ethernet technology itself. Obviously, the second statement is provably incorrect, and I can more or less prove to you that the first statement is incorrect, and that will be clear to you by the end of this talk. So let's do a quick recap on 1.0. I can give you a million slides. The single most important slide to me is on-chain transaction volume in terms of number of transactions, not dollar weighted average or anything like that. As you can see, we're back towards approaching January 2018 peak in terms of on-chain transaction volume. And that's good news. And we'll get into scaling in a minute. Okay, so 64 billion, that's great. Asset class that didn't exist 10 years ago, 100% based on speculation. What's next? All right, so our perspective on Bitcoin 2.0 is ultimately 3 things. And these 3 things ultimately lead towards what we believe is mass market consumer adoption of Bitcoin. Not in the way a lot of you may think, but still mass market consumer adoption, right? There are 3 things that have to happen, right? In terms of hard money, scalability, and enabling global adoption, which I believe are going to cause an explosion in Bitcoin's market cap over the next 4 years. And I can prove it to you, and I'm going to show you why, and I'm going to give you the slide so that you can go prove it to your friends after I'm done. Okay, hard money. This is the easy part. Obviously, if you're in this room, this is the part that you already know, the part that you probably preach to your friends that think Bitcoin is bullshit, but I'll walk you through it anyway. So in terms of hard money, let's talk about the opposite first. I'm sure if you look at this slide for 10 seconds, you get the point, right? These are currencies that have failed spectacularly. Every currency issued by a government has failed, more or less, or is on the path to failing. These are the ones that have already failed spectacularly. But if we take just Zimbabwe as a case in point, what happens? What does the graph look like, not only for price inflation, but for currency inflation itself? That's what the green line represents. Now, this is Zimbabwe. Obviously, this can't happen to us in the United States. Can't happen, right? Okay, never mind. So after World War I, when we took ourselves, or we're in the process of taking ourselves off of a commodity standard, what happened to actually the cost index relative to or the purchasing power of the dollar? This is a really ugly picture. Basically, the government capitulated on the idea that we could manage a hard asset and said, instead, we're going to manage economies. And in the process of managing economies, they basically said, we don't care about the hard value of productivity converted into stored value. That's your problem, Joe Public. And the only reason we don't riot about that today is because the average life expectancy is 80. If the average life expectancy was 120, there would be riots in the streets, right? Simply don't live long enough yet to understand that this is a big deal. All right, what does this translate into? Right, so inflation basically says the same money buys significantly less. A hard asset should be deflationary, which says over time, in theory, if the population is growing, if the economy is growing, the same asset should buy more. This is governments, it's unbelievable that governments don't get this. All of you get it because you're already initiated. So I'm telling you what you know. If you haven't read the Bitcoin standard and you want more of a background on what hard money really means, when I'm done, don't take out your phones yet. When I'm done, take out your phones and order this book from Amazon. It is by far the best book on what hard money means and why Bitcoin is on its way to becoming that. Okay, part 2, scalability, right? If you know me, you know where I stand on this. So hear me out anyway. All right, Satoshi's perspective was Bitcoin can theoretically scale infinitely, and I can show you how, and he did. He wrote about it. He showed everybody how it scales infinitely. Now, if you know anything about how Bitcoin works, you know that this is at odds with the fact that Bitcoin is the most inefficient transaction processing system ever created by man. right? But it wasn't designed to be efficient. It was designed to solve the trust problem, which now translates into the hard money problem, or I would say the hard money opportunity, right? So how do we reconcile these two statements? Ultimately, it comes down to three things. And again, if you're initiated, you probably know all of this. Efficiency improvements, layer 2, and block size. I'll quickly go through each of them because I want to get to the last point, which is most important. The most important point on this slide is the correlation between mining fees and the activation of SegWit, which effectively gave us a 2x increase in block size. So you can see the blue spike in mining fees, and I can tell you at Abra, we were subsidizing mining fees in the tens of dollars a year ago today, which obviously was untenable, and we had to unfortunately pass those fees on. But luckily, as we adopted SegWit and others adopted SegWit, those fees plummeted. But however, it's inevitable that they will creep back up again, or potentially spike again, as what I'm about to show you comes to pass. So we have no choice but to do much better than what we've done here so far. Now, in terms of off-chain scaling, this is an interesting slide. This basically shows us both dollar volume and Bitcoin volume of Lightning nodes out there today. I was about to say out in the ether, but that doesn't really make sense. So the volume of Bitcoin supported via Lightning nodes has obviously started to take off. Now, $2 million is a very small amount. Okay, this is not going to move the needle in terms of off-chain scalability. But I would posit that we're off to the races. This is really good news because it's working. It hasn't been proven that it can scale yet, but all the academics that I talk to tell me that it can and will scale. And that's great news. We're not quite there yet. And then the last piece is what I would call on-chain scaling, or simply increasing the block size. Now, if you remember the debate from last year, SegWit 2x, the 2x's lost that debate for a lot of different reasons. I would posit that it's inevitable that the block size has to be increased. Lightning will work, Bitcoin will become a settlement layer for those channels, and there simply won't be enough space to settle all of the transactions. And most core developers that you talk to would actually say the same thing, so all things come in time, and that will happen. And I wouldn't be surprised that by the time we're having the next 10-year party for 20 years, that the block size is 8x or 10x what it is now, because we've figured out how to make Lightning work, and this is the last logical step. Now, that having been said, this is a list of some of the papers that were presented at the Tokyo Scaling Conference. So I'm just giving you a small taste of what is out there, right? And the incredible amount of work that's going on to turn Bitcoin into not only hard money, but hard money that can be used as a transactional asset. Okay? Why is that important? Why is having Bitcoin become a transactional asset important? Well, I mean that if we don't have Bitcoin become a transactional asset, we will never have a path towards mass market adoption. So now that I believe that we're on the correct path to getting there, right, I believe that we have a viable means to create a step-by-step path to go from where we are today, which is pure speculation, which is necessary for liquidity, to global adoption of Bitcoin. I believe, and we believe at Abra, that global adoption of Bitcoin means that the average consumer will not know that they're using Bitcoin. And my favorite example or analog to that is your grandmother does not know, or your mother does not know she's using Bitcoin. Sorry, I didn't pick on ladies. Your father doesn't know he's using TCP/IP when he streams House of Cards. Nor should he have to. Otherwise, Netflix wouldn't exist. Okay, but in 1993, you had to know what TCP/IP was to use the internet because you had to manually install it on a Windows PC. That's kind of where we are, I would say, last year and maybe the beginning of this year. That's about to change. Right? I don't have to know what a private key is. I don't have to know what crypto is at all. And I have a user experience that hides all this complexity. But even more important than all of that, I actually have a use case that warrants all of this. Right? So what is that use case? Well, what if Bitcoin was used to actually store fiat, meaning real money on a smartphone? Bitcoin was used to give investment exposure to stocks, bonds, mutual funds, ETFs, and or basically once those assets existed, right, as collateralized assets using Bitcoin, I could actually give you loans against those collateralized assets, either using Bitcoin multi-sig contracts or probably that's where Ether actually plays an interesting role, right? Less interesting as the asset itself, more interesting as the contract. Okay. That's another talk. Okay. So let me explain what I mean by this. And if you're not clear that this is already working, we've processed close to $1 billion in transactions using this synthetic asset model already, and our average user has no idea that this is happening. okay? So lest you believe that this is a pipe dream, it's already happening for hundreds of thousands of people using our apps. What I mean by this synthetic asset model is that using Bitcoin, I can effectively give you investment exposure to any liquid asset in the world. Well, how do I do that? Well, let me explain it I'll give you the 1-minute version, and then if you go to the Abra.blog site, there's a couple of articles that explain it in detail. If you want to put $100 on a smartphone using Bitcoin, I will enter into effectively a Bitcoin script contract with you that at the moment you put the $100 on says, at the moment you're putting it on, what you're actually putting on the phone is Bitcoin, worth $100. And if the price of Bitcoin goes up, the multi-sig script will cause you to lose Bitcoin, and if the price of Bitcoin goes down, it will cause you to get more Bitcoin. And the value of what you're holding will stay $100. And you're holding the key to your Bitcoin, and I'm holding the key to my Bitcoin as the counterparty. And of course, last year when the price of Bitcoin plummeted, Abra was making a lot of consumers whole in those bets, but I'm still standing here, so obviously we didn't go broke in the process. So we run a trading operation that hedges away that counterparty risk in real time. And we actually make reasonable money on the spreads there. And the consumer is very happy because the complexity is completely hidden. They have no idea what I just said. All they know is when they look at the phone tomorrow, it's still $100. And when the regulators ask us how we're doing this, we show them, we say, we got it, it's legal, keep doing what you're doing. Just don't start holding their keys. We can now do this with any liquid asset class in the world. We started out with 50 fiat currencies. We're now doing it for 27 cryptocurrencies as synthetic assets, plus one index token we created, which is a mashup of the top 10 currencies. So what are the implications of this? Let's think about this for a second. Let's take a step back. Fidelity, shareholder in Abra, manages $2.1 trillion in assets under management. If you add up all these numbers, this is not everyone. This is just a few that I chose at random. This is all consumer retail. No institutional money, no asset management like BlackRock or any of that. Just consumer retail, right? 2.5 trillion approximately. And there's a lot more than that. This is just a piece of it. What if Bitcoin were used to collateralize investment exposure in markets where people had simply no access to S&P 500 ETFs, mutual funds from Vanguard, or any combination of any of the things that those other companies are managing? Mexico, tens of millions of people, 100,000 investment accounts in the entire country. It's insane. The vast majority of money is held in cash at home or in bank accounts earning 1% in a currency that's continually falling in value. And we go there on the ground and talk to these people and say, we don't trust the banks here, so we just simply put the money in the equivalent of a money market account or leave it in cash. But if you could give me a Venmo-like app that would let me do that easily and invest in dollars at 2% or even, spiders, wow. Okay, so let's do the math on that. I just said 2.5 trillion via those other firms. Our estimate is that if you think about the Middle East, China, India, Mexico, Indonesia, Philippines, there's probably 3 to 4 trillion in consumer retail assets sitting in cash, doing effectively nothing. If we gave those users a clear onboard path to collateralize those assets in any liquid kind of traditional retail investment class using Bitcoin, a few things would happen. One, most of them would have no idea they were even using Bitcoin in the first place, vis-a-vis the other slides I showed you. Two, there simply wouldn't be enough Bitcoin to collateralize those contracts. Bitcoin is worth 64 billion. So what's going to happen? And only about 20% of Bitcoin is liquid today. So what's 1/5 of, let's say 13 billion, roughly. 13 billion is liquid. If that 13 billion is needed to collateralize 100 billion worth of investment contracts, which I believe will happen, because Abra is not the only company working on this, what will happen to the price of Bitcoin if there's not enough to go around? Okay? So obviously, we believe that if this happens, Bitcoin's market cap will have to be greater than 1 trillion. And we did it with no marketing for $1 billion worth of transactions over the past year for a few 100,000 people. What's going to happen with not only Abra, but all of the exchanges who realize that, converting dollar to Bitcoin and back and forth is an interesting business, but this is 100x bigger, start to get into that business as well. So this is why we believe that there is a segue from going from speculation, yes, maybe longer term, people will overtly know they're using Bitcoin to buy coffee, but more importantly, in between, Bitcoin becomes programmable money in a way that enables, for the first time, those trillions of dollars to move into the traditional economy in a way that the average consumer doesn't even have to understand it. So thanks for listening. If you want more background on how this works, our blog site explains it in way more detail, and I'll be around happy to answer any more questions you have. Thanks a lot for listening.